Well, it is 10 o'clock, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for jumping on this Zoom call here. My name is Jenny Thielman. It seems as though you all know each other already, which is fantastic. I am with the History Center, and Barbara and I have been working on getting this event out to you, and we were originally thinking we would be meeting at the History Center. Gosh, we sure dodged the bullet on this one, and we're lucky to be home and doing this by Zoom. So appreciate everyone jumping on here today. But I'm going to go ahead. You're not here to listen to me talk, but on behalf of the History Center, I want to welcome everyone. And we are recording this, so if you wouldn't mind, please do mute your microphones. And if you do have questions, I think Barbara will leave a time for question and answer at the end of her presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Barbara Feller.
Thank you, Jenny. And thank you so much for arranging this to be on Zoom. I'm just happy, especially now that I see the snow, that we didn't have to go anywhere to be here. But as many of you know, I have a grandson who's undergone some very serious surgery. And so we're being extremely careful with how we work our days through this pandemic. Because his major problem is respiratory. So, but that's going well, and I just thank you all for coming out and meeting us, and I hope you enjoy this program. So I will begin. Most people know, or who know the name Grant Wood, know of him because of this picture. This is American Gothic, his most famous painting. But nowadays, with things changing the way they are and modernization and everything, there are a lot of people who really don't know the name of this painting or anything really about Grant Wood. And but they usually start with this, and I've seen spoofs of this in every country that I've been in, basically. So it's pretty famous all around the world. But my introduction to Grant Wood came through this painting, which is not very well known. I'm getting a little interference in some sound, so if there's somebody who doesn't have themselves on mute, I'd appreciate it if you would mute yourself. Thank you. I think you just did. This painting I saw when I was doing research at the History Center, which is where we are coming to you from, and we are old friends. At the time, my desk was in the archives, and I was doing programs for children, and I was supposed to tell them how we use archives when we're doing research, how the museum's archives are used by people who are writing books or finding out about history. And I found this box in the archives about a gentleman named J. Sigmund. And inside the box, it had his photograph, it had a map, it didn't have the map, but I used a map, there were maps there. And it had a letter that he had written to somebody who was a fan of his poetry, and it had a book of his poetry. But I had absolutely no idea who J. Sigmund was. So I had to go about doing my own research. And when I was doing that, one of the board members said, "Oh, we know J. Sigmund's daughter-in-law. She lives at Cottage Grove Place." And they arranged for us to meet. While I was in, her name is Virginia Sigmund Myers, and while I was in her little apartment, she brewed me some tea, and she said, "Just take a look around, make yourself comfortable." And I saw this painting on the wall, and I thought it was a really nice painting. Now, I'm not an artist, but I said to her, "I really like this simple painting. It looks kind of impressionistic. Is it an impressionist painting?" And she said, "Oh, look closely and look and see. It's interesting that you said that. Look who painted it." And there was the signature, Grant Wood, Wabeek, Iowa, 1928. Virginia, as she had me call her, even though she was in her 90s, gave me the story about this painting. Now realize this painting was just hanging on a wall in her house because her father-in-law, after he passed away, after J. Sigmund passed away, gave it to his son. And by this point, his son had passed away as well, and she had married somebody else and everything. But she still had this painting. And the story behind it is that in 1928, J. Sigmund was taking a walk with his friend Grant Wood, and Grant was just trying to figure out what kind of a style he should get. He wasn't happy. He kept trying to copy the Impressionists, and he'd gone to France and everything, and he just didn't feel comfortable with their style. But at that point in time, people thought, if you're going to be an artist, you have to be an Impressionist painter. When J. Sigmund told him, no, you don't. You know what? Just look at this. Look at what we're seeing right now, walking here along the Wapsipinicon River. It's beautiful. You should be painting Iowa. And he pointed out these quilts hanging on the line, and Grant Wood painted them and gave that painting to J. Sigmund. And it's basically the first one where he's starting in his modern style of trying to paint Iowa. It's an amazing painting. And as you see it here, I ended up getting it for the History Center for a temporary exhibition. And at the time that, that Virginia passed away, she gave it as an on loan, permanent loan to the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. But since then, it's been sold by the family. So when Grant Wood went to find out about putting together, he was working on a special project for the Armory, for this, the Veterans Memorial window, and he needed to learn about stained glass. He went to Germany, he went back to Europe in 1928, thinking about what J. Sigmund had said to him. And when he was there, he took a look at paintings other than Impressionist paintings, and he saw some paintings by specifically a man named Hans Memling. And when he was looking at those, he thought about what his advice had been, thought about his mother, and when he came back, he painted this painting along those lines rather than along the lines of Impressionist painting. And as you can see, they have these portraits, they have the people holding things that relate to them and a background that relates to them. So here he is, he puts his mother, and that brooch that she's wearing in the painting, by the way, is the same brooch that's in American Gothic. And he puts a painting behind her that shows a scene of Iowa. And before he'd left, he had started a painting about John Turner, who had started one of the very first funeral parlors in the entire country, which is now the History Center, as a matter of fact. And but this was one of the first funeral parlors, and so Grant Wood called him a pioneer. And after going on this European trip, he changed his painting so that he put a map. This is a plat map, an early plat map of Iowa. He put it behind him as the symbol for what he did. This is how the window turned out. It's absolutely gorgeous. Of course, it's still there. He had his sister, Nan, model the figure of peace. And he had been a teacher for a while at McKinley Junior High, and he used his students as models for each of the soldiers. And they represent the various wars that we had been in up to that point. Well, that turned into a problem, as a matter of fact, because our most recent war had been in World War I. We had been fighting Germany. He'd gone to Germany to do this stained glass work because they had the best artisans. But once the window was done, there was a lot of trouble in getting it dedicated. And to tell you the truth, I'm not sure if it finally got dedicated. Maybe one of you knows the answer to that. But it is there, and it is gorgeous. So anyway, after learning about J. Sigmund, and believe me, I became compulsive about him, and I even wrote a book about him. So he's an interesting figure, but we're going to talk about Grant Wood. I wanted to learn a little bit more about Grant Wood. Grant Wood was born to Hattie and Francis Merivale Wood, and here's a picture of him at age 9, which is the age he is in the story that I've written. This is what Anamosa looked like. He was born on a farm outside of Anamosa. This is what it looked like at the time of our story. And he was pretty happy there. He went to school. He's doing a lot of work on the farm. His father wasn't entirely supportive of the idea of him painting because he wanted him to be a worker. He wanted him to help out on the farm. He didn't want him to be wasting his time. But his mother was very supportive, used to give him supplies like they couldn't afford real supplies, so she would give him charred bits of wood from their fireplace or from her stove, and boxes that had been used, and he would draw in his own little studio under the kitchen table. But in 1901, everything changed because his father passed away. And I'm going to read you about the move that they made. They had to put their entire farm on auction, and I'm going to read to you about the move that they made to get to Cedar Rapids. So he went by train, and most of the words in my story, I want you to know, came from an autobiography that he started that had never been finished called Return from Bohemia. There is a painting of Return from Bohemia, which he was going to use as the cover. His book never made it past age 10. It actually ends on the day he left Anamosa and went to Cedar Rapids. But here's my chapter 9. The benches, the walls, and even the curved ceiling inside the railway car were made of highly polished slats of wood. The seats, which were placed back to back, were connected with black enameled wrought iron. All this reminded Grant of the frames that connected the benches to the school desks back at Cottonwood School. Grant sat next to Ma, who held his still sleeping baby sister on her lap. His 2 brothers sat facing them, Jack with a rather silly-looking grin on his face, and Frank, who couldn't seem to stop talking. "See those men over there with their pocket watches out?" Frank asked as the train began moving. "That one is the station master. The one next to him is the engineer. They have to match up the time on their watches with the station clocks to be sure we're on schedule." How did Frank know all those things? Grant wondered. As the train picked up speed, the rhythmic sounds of the wheels against the track seemed to soothe Ma. Soon, she was nodding off, so Grant pushed Frank's chatter to the back of his mind and stared out the windows. He pretended that the windows were picture frames and he was in some sort of a huge museum where all he had to do is sit back while the paintings moved alongside him. The first painting he saw looked like a castle. A sign told him it was no castle, though. It was the Anamosa State Penitentiary. He'd heard of that place. It was filled with killers. One had killed his own mother when he was only 10 years old. As the train headed out of town, they passed a huge farm with buildings made of stone from Stone City. Pa had told him the convicts worked right out here in the open. What if one of them managed to escape? What if he hopped on this very car? Grant gave a shiver. He recognized the next scene, a cemetery. This was even worse. Maybe this wasn't such a good idea, Grant mused. "That's where Pa is buried," Ma whispered, as if she'd awakened in time to say one last goodbye. Grant huddled close to her. Frank stopped talking. Even Nan let out a whimper. "Well," Ma broke the silence a short time later as they passed over the Wapsipinicon River, "we can't let Mrs. Abbott's chicken sandwiches go to waste now, can we?" "Cookies too?" asked Jack. "I'm hungry." Grant jumped up to pull the basket of food down from a shelf over their heads. Ma offered a prayer of thanks as Grant distributed the sandwiches and handed a cookie to Nan. "Da-da," she said with a serious little face. Grant knew that Nan was just making sounds, but somehow she made him feel grown up. And when he saw how the simple words brought tears to Ma's eyes, he decided he'd take special care of both Ma and baby Nan from now on. And he did. For many years in his art studio, they shared their homes together. This is a house which happens to be on 14th Street, very close to where Coe College is. And it's still there today. It has a marker, but it is, you know, it's not open as a museum. It's just lived in. But this is the house that they moved to. And Grant Wood went to the neighborhood school, which was Polk Elementary School. And that is still there today, although it looks completely different from his day. And it's only a few blocks from there. But it was there that he actually met Emma Groton, who was the arts supervisor. And she had a great influence on his life. I'm going to read you another clip. And this is when he's, you know, when he first gets to school, the kids are making fun of him because he's a quote unquote farmer and he's not dressed the same way they are. And he's pretty shy. And the kids are kind of making fun of him, but he has a good sense of humor. So he's trying very hard to get away from it, but he just doesn't know what to do. Then he hears that they're studying Bird Day, and he hears that there's going to be an art teacher. For the very first time, he's going to have an art teacher. So he runs home during lunch, and he finds this newspaper clipping that was in the Anamosa Eureka, and it's real, I'm telling you. And it told about how he had seen all these birds. This young man had spotted all kinds of birds, and they had a thing about it. So they called him Master Grant Wood. So he comes back to school, and this is the scene, so I will read it. The newspaper clipping in the pocket gave Grant a new sense of confidence. He slid into his seat well before the bell, eager to begin the very first art class. Boys and girls, I'd like to introduce Miss Groton, our district art supervisor. Please give Miss Groton your full attention, Miss Wilson announced. Good afternoon, Miss Groton, the children chimed in unison. Good afternoon, children, said the art teacher. I'm most happy to be here with you. Now I ask, how many of you like to draw? Grant raised his hand high. He noticed that most of his classmates had raised theirs as well. He was happily surprised at this, as he didn't realize there would be that many. Have you ever tried drawing a bird? Fewer hands went up this time, but Grant's remained raised, his heart thumping in anticipation of Miss Groton's next question. Would she ask what kinds of birds they'd noticed? I'm going to interrupt right now just to say that we're having a little bit of interference. If you're not on mute, could you please go on mute? Thank you very much. Would she ask what kinds of birds they'd noticed? Would he be able to share his newspaper? And do any of you have a favorite bird that you like to draw? Miss Groton continued. It wasn't quite the question he had anticipated, but Grant's hand shot up in a most enthusiastic way. Yes, Master Wood, she said, checking the seating chart Miss Wilson had provided. Which type of bird do you like drawing most? Chickens, ma'am, Grant shouted in an uncharacteristically loud voice. To his horror, the response produced quiet titters, laughter, and even a loud guffaw from one particularly strong boy who was always among the first chosen for teams at recess. Always the farmer, someone said with a laugh. Class, that's quite enough, Miss Wilson admonished, tapping her desk with a ruler. Grant slunk back in his seat and tried to hide. The sudden warmth flowing over his face told him it had turned as red as his hair. That was a most delightful answer, young man, said Miss Groton, as if she hadn't heard a sound from the others. I myself believe chickens are almost the royalty of birds. Would you care to come up to the chalkboard and share an example of your work? Caught between embarrassment and happiness at Miss Groton, this was nothing like he'd imagined. He turned to the chalkboard and stood silently rocking from one foot to the other while he gathered details in his head. After several moments, he drew a Plymouth Rock hen. Grant wasn't quite sure why, but the class sat in silence as he worked. When he finished, he turned around and saw looks of amazement on their faces. That is wonderful. It's just a wonderful rendition, Miss Groton enthused. Look at the details, class. Master Wood even put his hand on a nest of eggs. Then a most astonishing thing happened. His classmates applauded. So as you know, from there, he does go on. He goes to high school. He meets Marvin Cohn. The two of them actually work with the art museum, which is across the street from their high school. And as he gets his reputation, John Turner gives him the job of designing this first funeral parlor, which is now the History Center, and gives him, in this building that you see, which is called 5 Turner Alley, was a carriage house that went with the original mansion, the Douglas Mansion, as it was. And the top floor of that carriage house becomes Grant Wood's home, his studio, and it's just a small place. You can see it in the other picture here, and you can see it today. It's open as part of part of the art museum, and it's right next to the History Center. So it's a nice little area there. And look at his sense of humor and his use of this small space. He actually started Theater Cedar Rapids in this little tiny space. But what you can see is the fireplace. The hood of the fireplace is made of a metal basket from the farm. The doors to the right of that are folding doors that are covered in an old pair of overalls. And when they open up, a table pops out, and that's where they have their meals. And behind it is this little kitchen. And at the bottom of the stairs, which are very, very steep, and believe me, I worked there, and many people, elderly people who had memories of Grant Wood, would come up those stairs, and they are pretty steep. But the bottom of the stairs is a door that has glass. You can see the top of the glass. It was actually made out of a coffin lid, and the coffin lid, he painted it with a little dial, a clock that says, I'm taking a bath now, or come on up, I'm free to see you, or whatever. He had all these various things. That was his sense of humor and his way of letting people know whether it was even worth coming up those stairs. But he was well loved throughout the community, and he always remembered his original advice from J. Sigmund to paint Iowa. And one of his paintings, of course, had to include chickens. Here's a painting that ended up becoming part of our Iowa Quarter, Arbor Day, where they're planting a tree outside the schoolhouse. This painting, Young Corn, was turned into a postage stamp. And this is one of my favorites. This is the painting Dinner for Threshers. There's quite a lot in Grant Wood's memories about the days that the threshers would come. And as a matter of fact, J. Sigmund's wife gave him some of the things that are used in this painting, some of the dishes, the tablecloth, and that kind of thing. So that makes a nice connection back to J. Sigmund. Here's that painting I mentioned, Mother, or Woman with Plants, of his mother. But no matter what he was doing, he told the newspaper, and this was true, all the really good ideas I ever had came to me while I was milking a cow. Here's his next to the last, he made 2 final paintings and very, very close together at the end of his life. This is Spring in Town, and it is actually, it was painted in Iowa. It was painted in his studio in Clear, but the model was in Iowa City, but we know that this is J. Sigmund's house. We know it because in the painting, which you can't see right now, there's a church across the street. This is the street where the quilts were hanging. And if you look at the quilts in this painting, you will see that original pattern, same colors as that original painting that got me started on this whole thing. I've written 2 books, one on J. Sigmund called Road to Wabeek and one on Grant Wood's childhood, and they're both available at Ice Cube Press and at the History Center, at the Art Museum, and at the Grant Wood Studio in Anamosa. They're also available on Amazon. I thank you, and if you have any questions, I will get out of the chat and out of the sharing, and we'll talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.
Now you can unmute yourself. Thank you, Todd. Anybody have any questions?
Barbara, what was your biggest surprise in doing the research?
Well, I didn't grow up in Iowa. And I think my biggest surprise was just seeing how much cultural history we have here and how it all developed and how close the people were. I should have realized that, but it really impressed me. And the beauty of the countryside impressed me, because before I started doing research for this, I was like, we'd drive down the highway or the main streets of Cedar Rapids or anything. I really came to respect and love the people and the surroundings. And maybe that's a surprise because, you know, I was born in New York. So there you go.
Thanks.
I have a question. Can you hear
You're
me?
welcome.
Yes.
Thank you for coming. Any other?
What year?
I can. I don't know who's talking, but I can hear.
My name
Yeah.
is August. What year did Grant Wood teach at McKinley?
He was there from about 1921 to 1925, but he did take a break in the middle. There.
Okay. Thank you.
I hadn't realized, Barb, that he went to Polk, which is where my 2 oldest kids went. So that was an interesting. Wait, I know it's a totally different building, but it was still it was a good connection.
Well, I might add too that I think there was a dedication of the Veterans Memorial window, and I think that took place in the 70s, and that Nan Wood Graham was back for that dedication. By then, the controversy from the Daughters of American Revolution had passed by, and Grant was again being recognized for his talent. And I think Nan was part of that dedication of the window.
I think Barbara might be having some technical difficulties. I think we've lost her. She is no longer on the call.
May I make a?
I'm back. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. It just sort of disappeared all of a sudden.
Yeah. My name is
Barbara.
Pardon?
All right.
No, I think I'm okay now.
After the flood of 2008, that window, of course, was on the Coliseum, and they had to remove it, and they sent it to Davenport, where they took it all apart and put it back together. They insured it for $1 million, and then they sent it back.
Oh my goodness!
Remounted it.
Wow.
The water was up to the 1 or 2 feet high on
Wow.
that window.
I think we're just lucky that the derecho
Oh my
didn't
goodness! I'm
damage
glad
it.
it was. I knew it was. Yeah.
The derecho, fortunately, that wind went in a
Thank
different direction. Otherwise, we might have lost it. And I would guess it's valued at many millions by now too, or maybe it's irreplaceable, of course.
When we work in a museum, we don't know the price, you know, we're not even supposed to ask that question, but I can tell you that when I was working at 5 Turner Alley, they had a special exhibition of Grant Wood's paintings, and when American Gothic came to town, which he had been paid $300 for, it came in a Brinks truck. None of us on the staff knew exactly when it was going to arrive. They had to put in special wiring in the walls. We had guards. You know, this painting is just, you know, we have no idea, but it's just, yeah, it's amazing what a difference. Of course, Grant Wood, as I said, he got $300 for it. So there you go. Any other questions? It's good to see you all. My husband said I was kind of going in and out. Were there any things that need clarification?
May I make another comment? This is August.
Certainly may.
Okay, I went to McKinley, and my senior year was 1951, and we dedicated we had a large bust. It was a plaster bust, but it was huge. I would think it was maybe 3 foot tall and 2 foot wide, you know, like from his shoulders to his head. So we had a study area, and it was dedicated to Grant Wood, of course, because he had taught there before and it was well known. But they also had a bench that he had carved, and in the top of it was a blonde bench. And in the carving, it said, what did it say? Something about, oh gee, something about the way of the transgressor is hard. Yeah, that's what he carved into that bench.
It's hard. Yes.
They had the bench outside of the principal's office. So when you got called to the principal's office, you got to sit on that bench until he called you in. I got to know that bench.
Right. Oh, you did. Well, I'm glad to get to know you and hear some of your comments. Thank you, August.
I might say too that I've read Barbara's book and I enjoyed it so very much. She's found, I think, through her research, all aspects of Grant's young life, and it's a very enjoyable book. I'd recommend it to anyone.
Thank you, Paul. I wrote the book basically to share with elementary students who are older. It's not a picture book. It's just telling about this transition he had to make from going from Anamosa to Cedar Rapids, and it's based on, as Paul said, it's based on a lot of research. The names in the book are all accurate names and as much as possible, but of course I had to invent conversation and that kind of thing. But I've heard that adults are enjoying it as much as children, but I really wrote it for children to begin with.
I agree. I think it's a wonderful book. And I'm sorry I came late to the party. You may have to go back and in-service me on all this sometime, because for some reason
Jenny said they're recording it.
Oh, good. Okay.
They're recording it. Yeah.
So I have a question about.
Oh, Dorothy.
And Dorothy is Dorothy on there. Hi,
yeah.
Hi, Shelley. Hi, Michelle. I have a question about Polk School. How many
Yes.
buildings have been called Polk? Is it 2 or 3? Because recently there's been some really interesting photographs on one of the history Facebook group pages of the original Polk, which was really a remarkable structure with towers, and it looked kind of like a castle. So I'm just curious, does anybody know?
I don't know the answer to that. Yeah.
And
I wanted to, Yeah, get some of those photographs.
I'll see if I can locate them and send them
I
to
don't know the answer.
because it's there. It's just a really
I know there were at least 2, but it might have been 3.
yeah. And
Yeah, yeah.
and the world famous Miss Tapper was the principal at one point in time, and she's legend in the school system. And she was at Polk there, but I don't know if she was there when Grant Wood was there. Probably she came after. But anyway, thanks for doing this. This is so interesting. I'm going to mute myself.
After. I know that the teacher's name was Miss Will. Yeah. Anybody else have a question? How are we doing, Jenny?
Really great. If no one else has any questions, once again would like to thank you all, especially thank you, Barbara, for your presentation. And I'm anxious to get my hands on a copy of the book myself. Really appreciate everyone's time. And like Barbara mentioned, we are recording this, so we will be posting this on our social media as well as on our website. So if you missed out on any of it or would like to share it with your friends, please do so. We would appreciate that. But on behalf of the History Center, thank you so much, and really appreciate your time today, Barbara. And everyone go out and enjoy the snow, and let's make the best of a beautiful day. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, Barbara.
One
Thank you.
quick final question. I love to get author signatures in my book. How do we do that in the age of pandemic?
Yes. You want to answer that, Jenny?
So we do have some copies of the book down at the History Center, and one of these days here, Barbara and I will be connecting, and she'll be coming down and signing the books that we have in our store. If you are interested in purchasing a book, we can get you hooked up with one, and we can let you know once those books are signed if you'd like to wait for one.
Okay, I have my own copy right now, but I'm planning on giving it to grandchildren, so I'll get one and have you sign it, and then somehow.
If you want, if you are personally like near me, like Michelle's pretty close by, if you buy a book, you can come to my house. I will let you in as long as you're wearing a mask, long enough to sign the book at any rate. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Or I could leave it on your porch.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Just let me know.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
I thank you all very, very much. All right. Have a good day.
You too.
Take care.
Thank you, Jenny.